môžeme začať tlieskať teraz, pretože prichádza doktorka Mary Ellen Weber. Welcome.
Thank you so much. You know, this year is the 50th anniversary of the first Apollo moon landing. I was a little girl and I had the chance to actually watch Neil Armstrong step on the moon for the very first time. I was very young. I had no idea at that time that I would ever be an astronaut. Now you may look at that and you may think, well, we've gone to the moon. Where are we going? What is happening? I'm here to tell you that in these past 50 years, space exploration has gone to amazing heights. We have done so much, and we are poised to do even so much more. Now, what have we done? Let me first, before I tell you about my experiences, I did have the chance to fly twice into space. Before I talk about that, I think it's really important to understand how we get to space, because it is very, very difficult and it's very, very risky. Most people think that you go into space by going up very high. That if I had a big rocket engine and I shot straight up and I went 300 or 3,000 kilometers, that I would be in space. It doesn't work like that. You see, this force of gravity would pull me right back down to the ground, right back down to Earth. The way we go into space is with speed. It's about going very, very, very fast. So imagine for a minute, if I'm sure some of you, if not all of you, have thrown a ball in a straight line before, and you know what happens to that ball. This force of gravity will pull that ball back to Earth in a curve, in an arc. And then if you throw the ball faster, that curve gets larger. You could in fact throw that ball so fast, so crazy fast, that the size of that curve is actually larger than the size of the Earth. Gravity is still there. Gravity is still pulling on that ball, but it's going so fast that it misses the Earth. It would go around and around the world. So how fast do you have to throw a ball, or an astronaut, or a space shuttle, or any spacecraft? 28,000 kilometers per hour. 25 times the speed of sound. You have to throw it so fast that it goes all the way around the world in just 1.5 hours. And I could tell you that my travel here from California in the United States would have been a lot quicker if I were going that fast. And it's very unforgiving. In fact, when we want to come home, all we do is slow down by 1%. That's the difference between falling towards the Earth but missing it and staying in orbit, and hitting the atmosphere and coming home. Now, why am I talking about speed? Speed is the source of all the challenges in going into space. You see, to get anything going that fast, we need ridiculous amounts of power. We need explosives. We need a bomb to get anything going that fast. And once we're going that fast, when we do come home and we go into the atmosphere, we're going 25 times the speed of sound. So much friction is created, so much heat, that it's also very difficult. Very risky. How risky is it? If airline travel were as risky as going into space, there would be 1,000 airline crashes every single day on our planet. Now, you may be saying, well, that was true in the Apollo days, And that may have been true in the space shuttle days, but surely it's much better right now. We still don't know how to get anything going fast enough without it being almost as risky as it was back then. But the future is bright because so much has changed. In the Apollo days, what we did is we went to the moon. We did this bold, crazy thing of going all the way to the moon. We took those risks. What did we do after that? This is a picture from my first space flight. This is aboard Space Shuttle Discovery. Now, the shuttle was an incredible spacecraft. In fact, nothing that is being designed right now can even match what the space shuttle was able to do. The fact that it could take humans up for weeks at a time, the fact that it could carry huge satellites, the fact that we could even put a laboratory inside of its trunk space and do research up there, nothing being designed right now can do what the shuttle could do. Now, the space shuttle, what you're looking at, the space shuttle is the thing on your right, the white thing. That's the thing that got going fast enough, that went around and around our planet. But on launch, that was only part of it. You see, there were 3 engines, kind of like the engine in your car, but there were 3 of them, and they were much more powerful engines. Instead of gasoline, they burned liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. Liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, and all of that fuel was stored in that big orange gas tank that we're strapped to. But even burning liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen was not enough power to get us going fast enough. So we had 2 solid rockets attached to the side of that fuel tank, of that orange tank. They're called solid rockets because the fuel inside of them it's solid. Once you ignite solid rockets, you cannot shut them off. You are committed. In fact, other countries, Russia thought the United States was crazy to put human beings on a spacecraft with solid rocket fuel. So everything is changing very fast in our launch. Not only do we have to go very fast, we have to start out at 0, at a standstill, and build up to 25 times the speed of sound. On the space shuttle, the crew had 5 seconds. 5 seconds if there was a problem, to figure out what the problem was, to figure out what to do, and to do it. I mean, think about it. The alarm sounds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Did you do it? Did you figure it out? Did you get it done? Are you coming home? Those 5 seconds, that's why it takes years for astronauts to be prepared to go into space. Because we have to know every nut and bolt, every wire, every computer, every engine, every fuel source, everything about the spacecraft. So that hopefully, as a crew, also with the ground's help, in those 5 seconds, we could make it a good decision. Now, I had 2 space missions. My first space mission was to take up a satellite. So in the space shuttle, only at the very nose, at the very front, at the very top is where the crew was. It was about the size of 2 closets, no bigger than that. The rest of that space is what made the space shuttle so capable. It was like the trunk space in your car. That's where we could fit, whether it's a laboratory or a satellite or a space station part. Most of that was open to space. Now, on my second flight, it was a dream mission. I mean, if you can imagine, going into space, any mission is fantastic. But I was on the 3rd flight to help build the International Space Station. So the shuttle, the space shuttle, gave us experience, lots of experience, in leaving and returning to a planet. And when you think about it, that is always, no matter what planet we're talking about, whether it's a moon or a planet, that's the riskiest part of any space mission. So we had 135 flights, not just half a dozen flights in Apollo, 135 flights aboard our space shuttles. And then we built the International Space Station. And I was so honored to be on the very third mission. In fact, it was the last mission in which humans went and connected to another spacecraft that was empty and opened the hatch and went inside. Because after our mission, people were able to live there, and they have been living there ever since. 365 days, 24 hours a day. Now, so we've gotten experience at leaving and returning to a planet. Now we've had almost 20 years of experience of not just humans being in space, but all the logistics, all the planning, all the operations that it takes to actually be in space. It's a little bit like when you think of the Wright brothers, how amazing it was when they were able to take that very first flight. But what's even more amazing now is that we have airline travel. We have controlled airspace. We have a whole system. It's absolutely changed our lives. That's what we're trying to get to with space. Now, I want to take a moment, and I have, before we start the film, I do have some footage from my two space flights. It's from if you could, I wasn't quite ready. If you could stop it right there, please. Where was I? At any rate, moving on. When we launch in space, whether it's on a space shuttle or any other vehicle, we have to wear survival suits. Those launch suits that you see, they have helmets that would connect and seal it, and gloves. There is no air in space. There is no air. And so we have air inside our spacecraft, but if we got a hole, even a tiny hole in our spacecraft, we would lose that air. These suits would inflate and hopefully keep us alive long enough to make it back to the ground. Now, we would get, you can start the film please, we would get into these suits and go out to our spacecraft about 3 hours before the launch. Understand these explosives, this bomb that's sitting there, even the rescue crews were 3 miles away at this point. Now, at launch, 6 seconds before launch, those 3 motors, those 3 engines I told you about, those were ignited. But the real launch happened when those solid rockets were ignited. 4 million pounds, and by the time we cleared the launch tower, we were going 100 miles per hour. It's amazing. Now, you're lying on your back. We have chairs, but it's tilted back. So you're lying on your back. It's very uncomfortable. You have a parachute, you have a life raft, you have survival gear. All of it is there with you in case there's a problem. All the G-forces are going through your chest. You have to work to breathe. It's like a gorilla sitting on your chest. And all the time, you have to stay laser focused on what you have to keep track of. Because again, 5 seconds is all you have if something goes wrong. Now, after 2 minutes, those solid rockets, all the fuel was used up. Those 3 engines had to run another 6.5 minutes. Once those engines turn off, you are instantly weightless. You are going around and around the world. You are floating inside your spacecraft. One of the first things we do is get rid of that orange tank. It's going 99% fast enough, and that's not good enough. If we could pause it here, please. Now, this is the next day, and this is the back of the space shuttle. That's where the fin is. And there's a camera looking towards the front. It's looking over that trunk space that I told you about. And you see those little rectangles there? that's just at the very nose, the very front of the space shuttle. Those were windows that we could look out into space, out at that trunk space. I am moving this robotic arm. This is on my second flight as we were preparing to connect with and dock with the space station. Now, you can't just drive over to a space station. Physics doesn't work that way. What we had to do, we were in an orbit going around and around the world. We had to change our height, where we were, a lot of complicated math to perfectly match the orbit of the space station. That's how you get to another space station. Now, if you could start the video again, please. Off to the right, you're going to see the Earth, and just above the Earth, there is a little white dot. As amazing as it is to go 25 times the speed of sound to actually connect with that little white dot that's also going 25 times the speed of sound is incredible. That's what we use to actually connect it. That's what I was controlling during this part of the flight, and that's why you see it here. It had a camera that looked up as we got closer and closer to the station while we got closer to matching its orbit. Now, we had trained as a crew for hundreds of hours for this moment. It is one of the most difficult jobs. You're looking at about the entire upper floor of the space shuttle. That was like one closet. There's like a closet below it. And here we are, we have perfectly matched with the space station, ready to start building. Now, there are a lot of annoying things about being weightless. You don't realize how much time astronauts spend looking around for things that have been lost. Also, bad hair days is another problem with weightlessness. Now, you see me, it looks like I'm standing there. Not really, because I'm floating. What I have are two loops that are connected to the bottom there, and my feet are in there. And that's the only way I can be stable while I'm moving that robotic arm around. Now, you can see there's not just windows out the back, there's also windows above the crew compartment. And again, as tight and close as that is, that's how small the space shuttle was. Now, there is Jeff attaching some of the equipment to the space station. That's a view from the robotic arm. Now, I actually trained to do a spacewalk on my first flight. I was primary, but only if something had broken would I go outside. Now, I think I'm relieved that nothing broke. I will say that most of the training that we do as astronauts is up here. We study and we practice. The real physical training actually is for spacewalks. You see, our muscles in our legs are really big. That's how we move around on the ground. These tiny little muscles in your arm are what you use to move around in a spacewalk. Now, at the end of the spacewalk, Scott opened up the hatch to let our spacewalkers in. Now, you could close off hatches to make what's called an airlock to do a spacewalk, but if you open it all up, you could go down that long tunnel in that trunk space, and we actually had an extra room back there. That's where we carried thousands of kilograms of equipment to put both inside and outside the space station. You'll see everything is strapped down and tied down. If it weren't, it would float away and we would be spending hours looking for it. Now, if you go back through that tunnel, you could make a turn and you could go into the space station itself. It was very important that we flew when we did. There were batteries on the space station. Nobody had been there for over a year, and they were failing. And you know how frustrating it is when the batteries on your phone fail. Just imagine how frustrating it is when the batteries on your space station fail. If they failed completely, there would be no way to control it. Nobody would be able to go there. The whole program would have been over. There were two rooms at the time. You saw the first one. This is the second one. It was built by Russia. And that's where the batteries were. And there's Yuri and Susan changing them. Jeff is controlling the station from a laptop. Now I want to take you back to the space shuttle because right now you've only seen the upper floor. That's what you're looking at here. The lower floor we got to by going through a hole in the floor. The bathroom is off to the left, and right in front of it is this. We called it the galley, but it's the kitchen. I'm floating over it, putting my feet in some of those loops while I prepare dinner. All the food that we brought up there, most of it had the water taken out, and so we would add water to it and heat it up so we could eat it. Now the water that we ate and drank, we didn't bring up there with us. We used fuel cells. We combined hydrogen and oxygen electrically to make not only electricity, but the water that we ate and drank. Exercise is really important up there. I'll point out there's no seat on that bicycle. Think about it. There's only a belt to keep me from floating away. That's a drop of water. Gravity is what limits the size of raindrops here on the ground. In space, there's no limit to the size of a drop of water, except you better make sure it doesn't go crashing into your electronics. Now that was a sleeping bag, and if we could pause it right here, if that's possible. On my first flight, remember those windows that were overhead? I took my sleeping bag, which had clips, and I clipped it right underneath one of those overhead windows. Now, we go around the world in just 1.5 hours. So if you do the math, that means we have 16 sunrises every single day. If you tried to sleep in that, you would have 45 minutes of dark, 45 minutes of light, 45 minutes of dark. That would be awfully hard to sleep. So we had a cover over the windows. And in the mornings, Mission Control in Houston would play music to wake us up. And one morning, I heard the music, woke up, and I took off that cover of the window, and this next view is what I saw. I remember the moment vividly. And you can start the video. It's the Nile River and the Nile River Delta going off the left side of the screen. The Arabian Peninsula, the Sinai Peninsula, the beautiful blue water and golden sand. It was breathtaking. The other thing that I thought was really cool about looking at the Earth was seeing the power in the Earth's continents as they move around. In fact, the Himalaya mountains, this is it, was one of my favorite views. This is India crashing into China, and that crash is actually what's building the Himalaya mountains. There's another view of it there. Now, I talked about sunrises. We wanted to capture this. This is Venus and Mars that were two planets rising before the sun. And it was difficult to do. Our cameras weren't very good back then, and the light levels were changing so quickly. But since we had 16 sunrises every day to practice, we eventually got it right. Now, this is truly my favorite. This is the Earth at night, off to the right. And you see just above it, do you see that line, that bright line or faded line? That is the edge of our atmosphere. It glows ever so slightly. It's called the ionosphere. And it is like this glowing blanket encasing our Earth. And you can actually see meteorites going into it below you. Now we live on that flashing you saw, that's lightning. Thunderstorms connected over thousands of miles. We live on a great big magnet, and that magnetic field keeps out deadly radiation from the sun. Only at the poles of the magnet can it sneak in. It ionizes the gas like a neon light bulb, and it creates the auroras. And we got to fly through an aurora on my second flight. Now again, there's a whole view of the upper floor of the space shuttle. We set up seats. We had taken them down earlier. Think about it, you don't need seats. And we get back in those orange suits, and we slow down by 1% all the way on the other side of the world. And yet we have to make our way to this little landing strip over in Florida. The shuttle took off like a rocket, of course, you all saw, but it landed like an airplane. Keep in mind, it was an airplane without any engines. The crew had one and only one chance to be at exactly the right place, at exactly the right speed to make a landing. We were a brick with wings. We would just dive at the end of the runway. We would only begin to pull up at 2,000 feet. We weren't even slow enough to lower the gear to mere seconds before landing. So as an example of all the things you need to think about, are the wires and communication okay so that if I push the gear down button, it will actually come down? If it didn't, it wasn't survivable. When I look at this view, my two missions, great landings on both of them, right in the middle of the runway. When I look at that, what I remember is getting used to many things. I mean, you train and you prepare for this mission, and you have thousands of people who are depending on you for its success. Both of my missions were a success, which is a great relief. You're also getting used to gravity again. You now have weight. You actually feel the chair on your butt again. That pencil weighs something, the camera weighs something. But also, I remember very vividly thinking, I just can't wait to share this with my husband and my family and my friends. And that's why I love sharing it so much with you. Now, before I move on to what the future of space is about, I do want to go back to one thing about looking at the Earth from space. The thing that struck me the most about it is that I remember my first flight, I floated up to the window and I looked out, and there was a planet. When we look at our Earth, we don't think of it as a planet. We look at the countries. Where are the borders? Where are the divisions? Who is where? Who is what? You don't think that when you look at a picture of Jupiter. When I looked at our Earth, it was a planet, and we were all Earthlings. And it made me want to, it's one reason why I love coming to different parts of this wonderful planet and sharing this experience. And it made me want to protect this planet. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what the future of space is, because I was so fortunate to be able to go around and around the world. But that's all just part of our journey. The space shuttle was one step, our space station was another step, but there's more. There's so much more. You see, for 10 years or more, we have been designing this new spacecraft over on the right here. It's called SLS. It's not a fancy name, it's Space Launch System. It uses much of what we were using in the shuttle days, but it's taking it further, much further, where no person has ever gone before. Where are we going to go with this SLS vehicle, this brand new vehicle? What you're looking at here, you'll see the Earth on the left, and you see some orange lines, and just above the Earth, that's where we've been working all this time, ever since the Apollo days. For the past 40 years, we've been going around and around the Earth. SLS is going to take us not only to the moon, but 70,000 kilometers beyond the moon. Truly where no person has gone before. We've had a few delays, but we are hoping to fly that far next year. And less than a year after, we're going to send a crew, human beings, that far. In like 2 years. I mean, think about it. What an exciting time to be alive. I'm looking out here, I'm looking at all the young people in the audience, and I am so jealous of all of you. Because I got to show you video of me going round and round the Earth. But someday I'm going to have, and not too far from now, I'm going to have the chance to sit out there and watch your videos of going much further. Not only that, just in the past few months, the United States has announced a new and very, very exciting program. We are going back to the moon. We're going to use SLS as well as some of the spacecraft from companies like SpaceX, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, some of these other companies to go to the moon and create a lunar gateway. We are going to park a tiny little space station around the moon. And we're not just going to go there once or twice or half a dozen times. We are making it flexible. We want that gateway to be able to do everything, to change orbits, for astronauts to go there, do spacewalks, go down to the moon. This is the next big thing. It's called Artemis. In Greek mythology, Artemis was Apollo's twin sister. We are going to put the first woman on the moon in 2024 and return men to the moon in 2024. This is happening. This is real. This is the next step. So that's just in 5 years. But I'm looking at people who might not be quite ready to be astronauts in 5 years. Well, the good news is we will be going to Mars. 20, 30 years, depending on the investment that not only the United States, but all countries make in developing the technology necessary. But it is going to happen. We are going back to Mars. And not only will some of you have the chance to go to the moon, some of you, some of the younger ones, will have a chance to be part of the first crew to step foot on Mars. I mean, think about it. I so want to be there. I'm hoping I get an invitation from you for your launch when you head off to Mars. Now, I'm told I have some time for some questions, and so we have a microphone to help me out. Surely somebody has a question out there. Okay, now to be an astronaut, you need to be bold and you need to be brave. And I have one young, brave, bold man right here. What is your question?
Where do you do spacewalk from the space shuttle? Where do you go out to spacewalk from space
where
shuttle?
do you go? When we do spacewalks from the space shuttle, we would go wherever we needed to go. We would leave from, it's called an airlock, but it's basically a tiny little compartment that's sealed up so that we could get in it with air inside of it, seal it up, and then get rid of all the air so that we could open up a hatch and go into space. And sometimes we were building the Hubble Space Telescope. Sometimes we were building the International Space Station. Other times we were rescuing satellites. But we always had what's called a tether, but a connection, a clip that would keep us connected. Because if you were released, if you didn't have that, there is no way for you to get back to the space shuttle. You can't swim, there's no air. You're stranded out there. So spacewalks were a very dangerous thing. Only when it was really important would we risk sending astronauts out on a spacewalk. Great question. More questions?
How scared were you during the 5 seconds before the launch?
How scared was I 5 seconds before the launch? You know, I have to say I don't think it's fear. You know how risky it is to go into space. Part of your preparation is actually preparing to not come home. And what I mean by that is, you know, it's ironic, NASA's life insurance actually excludes spaceflight. I mean, think about it. And so they make an appointment for you with Lloyd's of London so that you can go buy your own life insurance. You have to designate a person in the astronaut corps to be your family's point of contact, who knows where the will is and the financial documents and things. You have to designate people to have a special badge on launch so that if something happens, they will know who to get to take to a special place. They give you time. there's a little party where you can invite 4 people 3 days before launch. But that was really a time to take your most favorite 4 people so you could say goodbye to them. And so you prepare to not come home, but then once you're done, you put that behind you. I was focused on doing my job. Your biggest fear is not that you won't come home. It's that you won't come home, or your crewmates won't come home, or your mission will be a failure because of something you did or didn't do, or something you didn't know or you didn't review and didn't study. So I stayed laser focused on looking forward, trying to make it a success. Now I will say on my first flight, when you talk about right before launch, I told you that we get into there 3 hours before the actual launch, and it's uncomfortable and you're sitting there and you're waiting, trying to stay focused, trying to keep engaged. And before my first launch, at 30 seconds before launch, the launch control gave a call to us and they said, "We have a problem with some data coming from your fuel tank. We're going into a hold." Now normally when it happens that close to launch, that means you're not going. So we all went, "Oh, okay, we'll do this again tomorrow." And 10 seconds later they came back and said, "Nope, we fixed it, we're ready to go. 30 seconds, we're counting down." So that was a very interesting 30 seconds, I must say. More questions?
If you know serial like Lost in Space on Netflix, is it when do you think like it will be future of cosmonauts and like traveling people to space? Like in which year?
The future of shuttling people to space. There are many spacecraft that are being built right now. Russia is building new spacecraft. NASA has partnered with many companies to build new spacecraft, SpaceX and other people. The idea, we do want to shuttle people out into space. The reason why I talked about speed and the risk is that we still don't have a much safer way to get there yet. When will that happen? I'm not sure, but the people that will be going to the moon and going into space in these new spacecraft are going to need to be brave and bold, and I'm looking at you. I think we have a young lady over here.
How many years did you study to be an astronaut?
How many years do you study to be an astronaut? When NASA, I know, is looking for people, they're looking for people who will be successful. And the best way to determine that is, have they done many things and have they been successful in all of them? And so there's a lot of studying because you have to be you have to be knowledgeable so that you can learn all the details of your spacecraft. But then you also have to do many things. So I went to school, I went to college for 4 years, I got my PhD for 4 years, and I worked for 3 years. And I was 29 when I was one of the youngest astronauts to ever be selected. Other people work even harder and study even longer than that. Once you're selected, it still takes you a few years to learn all the nuts and bolts and to practice using all the procedures. So I was very fortunate. I was selected for my first mission only 2 years after joining the program, and I flew just 3 years. So I was very fortunate. I will say between my first flight and second flight, I thought I knew everything for my first flight, but I certainly learned more between those 2 flights. I think we have oh, here we go.
Hi. Do you think it's possible for humanity to leave Earth and move to space?
Do I think it's possible for people to move to space? We need to develop much more technology before that happens. Right now, you turn on a faucet and water comes. That's not going to be very possible up there. One of the things we need to do is to have 100% or almost 100% recycling of our water. We can't keep hauling supplies if people are going to live in space. That's just one example of the many things we need to learn before people will live in space. Will it happen? This is why I took the risk. I believe that that will happen. I was so honored to have a small part in making that happen. I talked about the steps: Apollo, shuttle, space station, Artemis, SLS, all these steps to get there. And for me to play this small part, what an honor that was. So if I didn't believe that that was possible, well then that was quite a waste on my part, a bad decision on my part. I think we have,
How intense was your training when you was just an astronaut candidate?
how intense was the training? Again, they want you to be physically fit, so there's an astronaut gym, and basically everybody goes there, and you stay fit, you stay healthy. They want you to be healthy. But the physical training, there wasn't really as much unless you were doing a spacewalk. All of the training was studying your spacecraft, studying the procedures. There was a saying that said there were only 2 ways to get in trouble by using our checklists and procedures. The first way was if you didn't follow the checklist exactly to the letter, and the second way was if you followed the checklist exactly to the letter. And what I mean by that is even the checklist could only help you if one thing failed. If 2 things failed, the checklist could kill you. As an example, on my second flight, very early, we were in the simulator. We had a team that was putting in problems, malfunctions, into our space shuttle, and we followed the procedure. Well, it turns out there was a failure that didn't show up on our computer screen. There was no way for us to know. But we worked through the procedure and we didn't survive that simulation. Now I have to tell you, it is not a morale builder to not survive a simulation. So we came up with a fix. We turned the light on above the commander on the left-hand side. He had an overhead light. And if that light went out at exactly the same time that our pilot on his microphone could not talk to us inside the spacecraft but could only talk to the ground, then we knew that that particular failure happened, and then we would have to use our minds, our own intelligence to change the procedures to live. That's just one example of all that you need to know and practice. So it's pretty intense. It's pretty intense, and they keep track. There's one crew. There's a final simulation you do before you go, and it's never a bad simulation. It's pretty. Anyway, they didn't survive. It was the very last simulation before the crew was going to launch, and that caught the attention of the leadership of NASA. And there was discussion about whether they were ready, and they were. They had just lost their focus. So I think we had this fellow in the blue striped shirt.
Thank you very much. So one of my questions is, you've talked a little bit about getting back from microgravity environment back to Earth, and I would like you to walk us a little bit through that process in terms of is it similar like when you get your cast off? Do you have to do special kinds of exercises to actually get your body back to being used to gravity? Thank you very much.
That is a great question. It's about basically adapting back to Earth when you're up in microgravity, when you're weightless and floating around for days, and these days for 6 months or even a year at a time. You have to first understand that our bodies have evolved under this very large force of gravity. Even the way your body fights an infection, the way the cells move through your bloodstream, uses gravity. In fact, when you're up in space, well, at any time, the sensors that tell your body whether you have enough liquid in your body or in your neck, and when everything floats up, your body thinks you have not enough liquid. And you, in fact, get rid of about 30% of all the water in your body. And you're fine. Your brain has enough water, everything's fine. There are some good things. Your legs look a little skinnier, which in some cases, that's a nice thing. But when you come back, that's a problem. Because what if I have to run away from a burning space shuttle? Now I don't have enough liquid. I will faint because my brain isn't getting enough blood, enough liquid. So NASA actually came up with this awful thing. They called it fluid loading. It was to get back that water that you had naturally gotten rid of. And so about 3 hours before you slowed down in order to come home, you would start eating mass quantities of salt and water. And it was disgusting. But you had to. And then the worst thing is you did that 3 hours before launch, 1 hour before slowing down, that deorbit burn. At 1 hour, they might call you up and say, the weather's bad, never mind, we're not doing that today. So the next morning, you had to get up and start eating salt and drinking water. So that's just one of the things, one of the joys of flying in space. The majority of astronauts do get sick on the way up. They've gotten good medicines that help astronauts adapt to weightlessness without getting sick. Coming home is a challenge, particularly with these long missions. Our bodies are very amazing. Our heart, most of our organs adapt back to gravity very easily, within days. The thing that doesn't necessarily is your muscles and your bones. Now, you saw me exercising on a bike. Exercise is important, mostly for your heart and things like that. It turns out for your bones, you need to pound. Your bones need to feel that pressure, otherwise you start shedding bone, shedding muscle. And this was very tricky for NASA to figure out. What they have now on the space station is a treadmill that instead of gravity keeping you stepping on the treadmill, you actually have bungee cords, you have rubber bands that are keeping you there. And they have found with that and also a vitamin D and calcium that astronauts are returning and their bones are doing very well. Eyesight is a big deal. We are finding that some people who are in space a long time have permanent damage to their eyesight, and they don't really know. So every astronaut is different. For me, I adapted coming back very quickly. I had a little bit of dizziness, but I was fine. I was great almost right out the gate. Some of my crewmates, one of them actually was in the hospital on IV fluids for a couple of days. So every astronaut is different, and they try to keep everybody healthy. Any more questions? We have one here. We'll come back to you.
Did your stay in the universe change have you reevaluated your priorities in some way when you saw our planet from a different point of view? If your life priorities changed, or if it somehow changed,
Did my life priorities change when I saw this planet that we're living on, that we don't live on a globe or a map, that we live on a planet? I can't say that they changed. I feel very much more protective of the planet, and I feel a greater desire to connect with people from all over the world. I really hadn't traveled much out of the United States at that time, and that's why when the U.S. Embassy asked me to come here to Slovakia, why I was so open to it. There is another reason why I'm very excited about being here in Slovakia. My family, I'm actually half Slovak. On my mother's side, I'm Polish, and on my father's side, I'm Slovak. And I know somebody's going to ask me, where is your family from? My father died when I was only 1 year old, and so I didn't get to ask him many questions, and so I don't know the exact place here in Slovakia. I know from my name Weber, I know we were in a region where there were many Germans, but anyway, so when I was asked to come here, I love going anywhere to talk about this, but it was really special to come here to Slovakia. Now, I think we had this gentleman in the black here who had a question, if we might be able to get a microphone to him.
Thank you. So I would like to ask, well, it might be a bit off topic, but how do you like Slovakia so far?
I'm sorry, how do
you like Slovakia so far?
How do I like Slovakia? I love it so far. I've been through most of Bratislava. In fact, I'm going all the way around all over Slovakia over the next few days. And so it's a real treat for me. Thank you so much. This is such an honor to come here and such a joy for me to be able to share my story and the future, because you are the future, that is the future, and what an honor for me to bring the two together. Thank you so much.